a little. Chapter 23 of the Confession of St. Patrick. A few years later, I was again with my parents in Britain. They welcomed me as a son, and they pleaded with me that after all the many tribulations I had undergone, I should never leave them again. It was while I was there that I saw in a vision in the night a man whose name was Victoricus, coming as it were from Ireland, with so many letters they could not be counted. It's a very vivid description. He gave me one of these, and I read the beginning of the letter, the voice of the Irish people. While I was reading out the beginning of the letter, I thought I heard at that moment the voice of those who were beside the wood of Volcut near the Western Sea. That's where he had been enslaved. They called out, as it were, with one voice, "We beg you, holy boy, to come and walk again among us." This touched my heart deeply, and I could not read any further. I woke up then. Thanks be to God. After many years, the Lord granted them what they were calling for. Most likely, this was in County Mayo, near the modern village of Killala. I don't know Ireland. This is stuff I found out by reading. That would be about the right distance, 185 miles, from where he caught ship. And this area was and still is among the coldest and wettest areas in Ireland. It's way up in the northwest. And in his confession, he spoke of his enslavement tending sheep, quote, through snow and frost and rain. So he's off to Ireland to preach, to convert, whatever. Contrary to popular opinion, he was not the first missionary to Ireland. In 431, Pope Celestine had sent a Bishop Palladius, quote, to the Irish believing in Christ. I would love to tell you more about Palladius, but that's the only thing we know, is that he was sent, quote, to the Irish believing in Christ. And he just vanishes without a trace. He apparently accomplished little of that we know of. Quite possibly because he'd been sent by the Pope. Now, I'm going to make two long digressions tonight, and this is the first of them. Well, actually, two long and one short. This is about Celtic Christianity. The Celts were a people, a Germanic people actually, who had moved across Europe prior to the expansion of the Roman Empire. Very early, they had moved across Europe and settled in most of Western Europe, not Spain, but certainly France, Belgium, the Low Countries, and Britain. And the Celts, whom the Romans called the Gauls, the Celts had their own social structure, which was tribal, and their own religious structure, I guess you'd say. And that is, they were the Druids. And I'll have to talk about the Druids later. That's the other major discourse. But right now, I want to talk about what Celtic Christianity was. It differed not in fundamental belief. Their basic beliefs were the same as Roman Christianity. But their organizational structure was almost totally different. And they had a number of practices and customs which the Roman Church did not have, and they did not have a number of practices and customs which the Roman Church did have. Celtic Christianity was not, because, let me backtrack. Roman Christianity really was Roman, not just that it was centered on the papacy in the city of Rome, but also it took its structure very much from the Roman Empire. Provinces and dioceses, as I've said before, those were Roman secular governmental terms. And their bishops were assigned to certain places, and they functioned frequently as governors as well as bishops. They were important civil authorities as well as important religious authorities. This was not true in Celtic Christianity. Their bishops were not tied to a given locality. They moved around. A lot of them were peripatetic. And in addition to that, some of them seemed to have ministered only within a certain clan or a certain tribe. They were not required to be celibate, and they emphasized less important than parochial structure was monastic structure. There were lots of monastic communities. Now, they weren't the same as Western monastic communities, but they were very similar. And these monastic communities functioned as centers of worship and pastoral care for wherever they were. Celtic Christianity was local and tribal and monastic. Roman Christianity was hierarchical and strongly centralized. There was no archbishop in the Celtic Church. Authority came partly from being a bishop, but partly was a question who was the most important bishop? The one that was the most charismatic, the one that was the most effective, the one that was the most respected. There was a lot of local autonomy for practices and customs. What were some of the significant differences? In the Celtic Church, they had a unique method of calculation of the date of Easter. They were working off a lunar calendar, so they celebrated Easter at a different time than the method that had been established by the Council of Nicaea. Baptism was almost always by immersion. They very rarely baptized simply with sprinkling or pouring. Usually it was by immersion. And given that we're talking about Ireland and Scotland, that I guess was a trial by combat. And one of the odd things was the question of the tonsure. The tonsure is the shaving of the head, in part, for monks. It's a way it's a mark of a monk. And the Roman tonsure you're all familiar with. I mean, you've all seen pictures of Friar Tuck. Good Lord, you shave the crown, and it leaves hair all the way around. Supposedly a reference to the crown of thorns. The Celtic tonsure was shave the front half of the head. And I don't know what that's supposed to represent, but this was a big deal. This later became an issue when the Celts and the Romans had to come to terms with each other. Celtic Christianity was more mystical, and it reflected local cultural practices, which means a lot of pagan things got turned into Christian things. Roman Christianity quite simply developed within the context of the Roman Empire, the cultural context of they focused on an attempt to have a high degree of uniformity across the entire area that Roman Christianity flourished, and they had a very definite institutional structure. Celtic Christianity, as befitted, I think, a tribal people, was not the same. None of those things were there. There was not the degree of uniformity in terms of practices from one place to another. And there was virtually no institutional structure as such. So, Patrick, great missionary bishop for Celtic Christianity, he traveled widely in Ireland. He pops up everywhere. And he was extraordinarily successful in baptizing and confirming and ordaining many, many, many people. He almost Christianized Ireland. Not quite, but he made good progress there. He also founded both parishes and monastic houses, mostly for men, a few for women. Even though there was a lot of resistance, the resistance came from the pagan chiefs and kings. If you're a king, and every chief thought he was a king in Ireland. If you're sort of like the Senate, they all think they're president. If you're a chief or a king, you're not liable to be initially happy about having somebody say there's a bigger king than you that they ought to be listening to. And great, great, great resistance from the Druids. He was imprisoned at least once. He was often threatened with death. But he appears to have been absolutely fearless. He went everywhere. Now, second discursus about the Druids. Druidism isn't really, well, it's hard to say a lot about it. It's a very ancient spiritual tradition. We know that because we have Greek authors writing about them very early. Now, they didn't always get it right, as far as we know, but they knew they existed. After all, the Celts were really a powerful force. And the Druids were what held Celtic society together. The Druids were the learned class among the Celts. They functioned as priests, that is, I'm using priest in its specific term, specific sense of one who is empowered to offer sacrifice. They functioned as teachers, they functioned as judges, they functioned as diplomats. They generally moved around a lot. Some of them were married, some were not. Their influence pervaded all aspects of Celtic life. Not simply religion, but law, medicine, what passed for history, and astronomy. And astronomy was very important. Notice I said astronomy, not astrology, astronomy, because knowing how to read the stars was believed to be, and to some degree is, how you know what to do agriculturally at what time of year. All right? The closest analogy I can give you to the Druids is that they're a bit like the very early pre-Davidic Old Testament prophets. They were authorities without an official office, and yet people deferred to them, and they were called in to do things like judge disputes. The Druidic religion was polytheistic, and they practiced human sacrifice. Not only blood sacrifice of animals, but sacrifice of people. We are told that they preferred, when possible, the sacrifices that were offered, the human sacrifices that were offered, were those convicted of murder or robbery. But if none of those were available, any human being of the right age and gender, depending on what the sacrifice was acceptable. They sacrificed people by hanging, by drowning, and by stabbing, and by burning. Now, They were, as I say, they were what held the Celts together as a people culturally, because there was never a single ruler of all the Celtic tribes. They were, no matter where in Europe they were, and also in Ireland, they were a tribal people. Tribes and clans really mattered, but they did have this common language, and they did have a common cultural heritage, which was carried on and shared by this learned class, the Druids.
Randolph, were they born into that class?
No, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not keeping score. I'm correcting my poor typing. Julius Caesar wrote a good bit about the Druids in his book on the Gallic Wars, because the Gauls were killed. He described them as possessing great authority, revered for their wisdom and knowledge. He also makes a point of the importance of their role as seers, as those who could foretell the future, either by various ceremonies or by interpreting omens. So even though the Celts never had a political unity, they had a cultural unity. The Druids were a class. They were a class within Celtic society, a non-hereditary intellectual elite. Their education was rigorous. You learned to be a Druid by studying with one or more Druids. The usual length of study was 20 years. During this period, they were required to master a huge array of subjects: poetry, law, what passed for history, knowledge of the natural world. This was very important. They were doctors, right? They were physicians, I should say. It's very interesting. Caesar says that there was one leader for all the Celts. Sorry, for all the Druids. We don't know if he means one leader in Gaul or one leader universally, but what's really that one leader is chosen for life, and that his successor would be selected, quote, I love this, by election or conflict. We don't know exactly what he meant by that. It may meant that if election failed, they would fight it out. Maybe he meant tribe against tribe. Maybe he meant something like single combat, because the Druids were warriors too. They went to war. Our knowledge of them is very limited for a number of reasons. Number one, everything that they learned by memorization and oral tradition. All of that. They despised written documents. They weren't totally illiterate. We know, you see some inscriptions. Some of them are so old they're written in Etruscan script. Some of them are written in Greek, some are written with the Latin alphabet. But they did not write books. Apparently they did not write letters. They relied on the oral tradition. And that was it. The other reason that our knowledge of them is limited, they didn't build very much. They did not build houses of worship. Their places of worship were sacred sites, frequently by a seaside, or for all of the most important sacred sites in a grove of trees, sometimes hawthorn, but the really big, important ones was always oaks. Oak trees carried a special place in their knowledge or their belief in the world. And most of you probably know that mistletoe, which grows only in oak trees, was a very important part of their annual cycle of ceremonies. Pliny the Elder actually describes some part of the sacrifice. It was a sacrifice some part of this ceremony. We don't know where he got his information, but there's no reason to believe it isn't correct. He was careful about things like that. In which the Druids would climb oak trees carrying golden sickles. They would climb the oak tree and cut mistletoe, throw it down. Meanwhile, on the ground under the tree, there would be other Druids performing a sacrifice of 2 white bulls. And the mistletoe would be taken, and among other things, it would be made into a liquid that was supposed to be good for curing infertility in women, and also a cure for poison. This was done around the beginning of the Celtic year. So that would be in the winter. Now, the other reason that our knowledge of them is so limited is because they made the mistake of crossing the Romans. And in Caesar considered them his enemies, and that didn't help. They lost a lot of their influence, of course, once all of Gaul had been conquered, and Britain. But the real breaker came in 60 or 61 AD. There was a Roman governor, this is under Nero, there was a Roman governor of Britain, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, who was a really competent military guy, extremely competent. He's not much remembered today, except for one thing, which I'll get to. But he was, if you study ancient Roman campaigns, this guy really knew his business. And he was sent to Britain with instructions to suppress what was left of the Druids. Now, by this stage, the Druids were really only super strong in Wales and Ireland. So this meant going into Wales, because Wales is part of Britain. And it must have been an extraordinary campaign, because just imagine, where are they heading for? Well, they're so diffuse that you don't know how you're going to, the question is, how are you going to destroy this group of people and their warrior friends if they're spread out all over the place in tribes and don't have a capital and so forth and so on? Well, they had one enormously holy site. It was on the island of Anglesey. Anglesey is the island that's just north of Wales, across a very narrow strait. And Suetonius Paulinus led his legions into the mountains of Wales against these Welsh archers, and the Welsh are already known as archers at this point, archers and spearmen, and managed, by developing new tactics, by just sheer force of will and Roman discipline, managed to keep pushing, burning villages, being the usual destructive people that they could be, moving towards the Isle of Mona, that's modern Anglesey, which they knew the Gauls would defend. And they got there. And the Gauls were over on the island, the Celts over on the island. The Romans built boats intending to cross. It was obvious they were coming. And on the night before they came, the Druids sacrificed all the prisoners they had, Roman soldiers, by burning them alive within sight of the Romans. Mm. This was a tactical error.
Payback.
When the Romans got over, they pretty much wiped out what was left of the Druids in Wales. So only in Ireland were the Druids still a strong force when Patrick got there. But they were still there, and that was who he was contending against. Patrick died in Northern Ireland in a place called Saul, S-A-U-L, just like the king. And that was the first parish he had found. And that's where he died at a pretty good age. Now, there are all kinds of myths and legends about Patrick. I mentioned the fact that he's often, called the Apostle of Ireland, that he was the first missionary. He was not. He also didn't drive the snakes out of Ireland. I'm sorry to have to tell you that. There have never been any snakes in Ireland. Never. There are no snakes native to Ireland. There's also the story about the shamrock, about him explaining the Trinity by looking at the three leaves on one stem, which strikes me as a pretty lame analogy, but it's certainly become, that's why the shamrock is such an important symbol for the Irish. It's connected with Patrick. There are many, many, many other myths and legends about Patrick, including the raising of 33 people from the dead. I'm not sure if that was all at one time. I don't think so. But this is typical of what we're going to see more of in a minute. This is typical of the Irish approach here, that myth, legend, and history get all mixed up, which can be very frustrating to the orderly modern mind, but they seem to get along with it pretty well. Most of the customs that we associate with St. Patrick's Day never originated in Ireland. Many of them are now practiced in Ireland. Anybody want to guess where they did originate?
United States.
The United States, largely New York. The St. Patrick's Day Parade, which is now held in Dublin too. There are all sorts of customs regarding St. Patrick's Day. The wearing of the green, that's also an American thing. It's just not, that culture. The culture of St. Patrick's Ireland is still alive and still very powerful in many ways. But Patrick was not the original patron saint of Ireland. The original patron saint of Ireland was a woman. Maybe. She's known as St. Bridget of Kildare, or sometimes Bridget of Ireland. And she preceded Patrick a bit. She's sometimes referred to as the Mother Saint of Ireland. Now, this gets really complicated and a little weird, but I can't help that. According to the hagiographies of lives of the saints, most of which were written in the Middle Ages, so later, she was an abbess who had founded a very important abbey at Kildare, as well as several other convents of nuns. There are very, very few documented historical facts about her. And the hagiographies are mostly anecdotes rather than any sort of what we'd call scientific or scholarly approach to trying to get to the real truth about her life. Lots of miracle tales, some of which are completely borrowed from pagan folklore. They say that she was the daughter of an Irish clan chief and a Christian woman slave, and that she was raised in the household of a druid before taking vows as a consecrated virgin. Now, this was a thing that even before there were houses of nuns, there were individual women. Remember St. Ambrose's sister, who took these personal vows of perpetual virginity, piety, sometimes poverty, whatever. And she was one of those. She is a patroness of more things than you can possibly think of. Learning, poetry, healing, blacksmithing, yeah. Lots. No, she wasn't a blacksmith. There's another reason why. Dairy production. Anyhow, there's a real debate over whether Bridget was a real person, whether she even existed. Why? Because there was a very important Celtic goddess named Bridget. Bridget was the goddess of poetry, healing, and metalworking. Why metalworking? Because she discovered among the people living around her a particular guy, and I cannot remember his name, I apologize. And this guy was a blacksmith, but he was a very, very, very good blacksmith and could make all kinds of fine metal work. So she had him make metal objects, chalices, patens, and so forth, to be used in the celebration of the Mass. He also turned out to be an extraordinarily gifted calligrapher, and so some of the very few documents that we have from this period do show a real interest in a high degree of artistic decoration in the psalm books and things of that nature. Some of them are absolutely stunning. You've probably all heard of the Book of Kells. That's an example. That type of decoration is very much Celtic. It very much comes out of the Celtic artistic tradition. Furthermore, the day on which she's said to have died, and her feast day is 1 February, that was a pagan festival called Imbolc. One theory is that she had been a chief druid at the temple of the goddess Bridget. Yes, there were female druids, not many, but there were, and was responsible for converting it into a Christian monastery. And that after her death, people assigned the characteristics of of that goddess to that woman. Another theory is that she never really existed, and the Christian missionaries somehow managed to Christianize the goddess. Kildare was where she had made her primary residence, although she did travel around. The Celts apparently like to walk. Can you put up that first picture that I sent? Where?
Okay, one of the crosses?
The first one. No, not the crosses, the other one.
Oh, the one to the left?
I sent you two in the same email.
Oh, okay.
One was a stone structure.
Hang on.
I couldn't do this if my life depended. I really depend on other people for so much. You got it?
I got it.
Yeah, that I think it's that email.
Yep. My system's real slow today.
Okay. Well, don't worry about it. Doesn't matter.
We're getting there.
Are we?
Eventually.
Good. I can use the break. Where did I put that? Yeah, right there. I just want you to see this if we can get it up.
Randolph, a question from the left field. Were the Vikings absorbed into the Celtic clan, or had nothing to do?
The Vikings don't come up for another couple hundred years.
Okay.
When they do, they come in with a vengeance.
Yep.
But no. Oh, well, don't worry about it. In Kildare, there was a place, and it's still there. It's a rectangle. There we go. Can we get this bigger so people can see it? Yeah. Can you see this here?
What is it? It's hard to.
Can't tell.
Okay, there. Inside here,
Oh, fire team.
that was the sacred fire of St. Bridget. And it burned beginning in the theory, the story, is that there was a sacred fire kept there by the pagans, and it was probably, as was the custom among a lot of people, including the Romans, the fire was probably extinguished at the end of a year and then rekindled to start the new year. After this was Christianized, St. Bridget had gathered a group of women who they essentially set up a convent there called the Brigidines, and they reinaugurated the custom of the fire. But they said, no, this fire represents the light of Christ, and it never goes out. It didn't go out. It was never extinguished until the 1600s.
Wow.
That was when Henry VIII destroyed the monasteries in Ireland, Wales, and England. It was said that there were, pardon me?
Did people keep it going? Keep
Yes.
The fire? Okay, it wasn't just miraculously.
No.
Thank you.
No, they had not yet tapped natural gas. There were 19 nuns in the house, and each of them was responsible for tending the flame for one day, and on each 20th day, Bridget tended it herself. Sorry, it wasn't the 16th century. Sometime between 1536 and 1541, when Henry VIII disbanded all the monasteries, priories, convents, friaries in England, Wales, and Ireland, seized their wealth, seized their lands, destroyed or seized their buildings, destroyed their relics, and dispersed and destroyed a number of libraries. It was a great tragedy culturally and artistically. And even to this day, okay, I don't know why I'm into pop culture references tonight. I started with Monty Python. I'm sure a number of you watched Downton Abbey.
Yes, yes.
What's an abbey?
A monastery.
An abbey is a religious house for either monks or nuns. And there are a number of places in Britain called houses, residences called this or that abbey. That's what they were before Henry took them and either gave them or sold them to his buddies. And the houses still bear the name. In 1993, the flame was relit in the market square of Kildare. It has been kept burning since then. Not in the market square. It's kept burning in a large sort of ironwork lamp. And there are still Brigidine sisters, and they're the ones who keep it alive. I found that very interesting. The Brigidine sisters were, of course, destroyed under Henry VIII, but they were reformed in 1807 and continue to this day. Now, there were all sorts of, and still are, all sorts of customs and ceremonies around St. Bridget, some of which clearly have pagan background, but not all. Could we see the cross, please? Of the crosses. some of you are almost certainly familiar with what's known as St. Bridget's Cross. Yes?
No,
A straw cross. In the south of Ireland, they look like this. In the north, they look differently. They have only 3 arms that come out. The legend that goes with St. Bridget's Cross is that under threat from the pagans, the Christians learned to make these little crosses for their houses, and they could throw them in the fire if the pagans were coming to see if they were Christian or not. And these are made, they're a very popular motif, let's say, in Ireland. You know, lots of tourists come back with them, wondering what they are. But there were a lot of rituals, and they varied from place to place. Remember, this is the Celtic culture. There's a lot of local option. People would make them in their homes on the night before St. Bridget's Day. And they would hang them in the rafters, and they were supposed to protect against lightning and fire. And there's even a little poem that goes with them when you hang them up. The other thing that was done on St. Bridget's Eve was to take a ribbon and tie it on a bush within sight of your front door and leave it there overnight. And you would measure it very carefully before you tied it up. And when you came out, you would measure it again to see how much longer it was, because it had gotten dew on it. It's Ireland, folks, and it's February. Of course it had gotten wet. And this was now believed to have been touched by St. Bridget, and who was, had come back for the purpose of touching ribbons, apparently. And all sorts of magical powers were ascribed to it, particularly healing power, particularly associated with sore throats. You'd wrap it around your throat and you felt better. But also for other things, ease of childbirth, all sorts of things. These ribbons would be coiled up and kept very carefully and brought out only when needed. So yeah, there's a lot going on with St. Bridget. Whether she was a real person or not, I don't know. And I really don't know. I get so confused about the amount of folklore mixed in with the amount of oral history.
So she recognizes the saint then, officially?
She, if you will remember when I talked about saints originally, I said now, ever since the medieval period, there's been this very careful process for naming saints. But they exempted all the saints before a certain period on the grounds that nobody could really know. So she's still included in the calendar. She's what's known as a calendrical saint, saints who have days associated with them. And I think she was just so important in Ireland that no pub would want to mess with the Irish, So yeah, she is still in the calendar. What was I going to say? Something that I totally forgot. Well, that's why I should write things down. So those are 2 of the 3 patron saints of Ireland. There is a 3rd. And he's actually my favorite for a number of reasons. He's known as Columba. Columba is Latin for dove. And we don't really know whether there was, we don't really know whether that was his birth name or whether it was a name he took when he became a monk. Because many, the religious do that. They take a new name when they make their final profession. But it may be, but it may not be. It doesn't really matter. He has been considered a patron of both Ireland and Scotland. One description of him, I love this. I just got to read this to you. Columba was a hard-nosed Irish abbot who was a great evangelizing force throughout the Celtic world. Well, he really was. So let's talk about him. Unlike both Patrick and Bridget, he was born later. He was born 521 in a town called Garton in Northern Ireland. We don't know what his birth name was. Maybe it was Columba, maybe not. Interesting, Columba is Latin for dove, and Jonah is Hebrew for dove. We don't know if he took the name because of he felt some affinity with Jonah, or whether it was given him at birth. We don't know. He was a member of Clan O'Neill, and he was a very aristocratic member of Clan O'Neill. Through his father, he was held to be the great-great-grandson of Neil of the Nine Hostages, who was an Irish king in the very, well, obviously 4 generations earlier. And much about his life makes it clear that he really was well born. His education began at a local monastery, and he was ordained a deacon there, and then went on to Ireland, throughout Ireland, to 3 or 4 different monasteries where he lived as a student, studying history and literature, and he developed into a very fine poet, which is interesting. He completed his education and was ordained a priest. Well, I say completed. He felt that his time of tuition at a very famous monastery in Clonard, where he studied under St. Finian, and Finian was a major intellectual influence on Irish Christianity. Now, what was happening here is the Romans had pulled out of Britain, and that left a power vacuum. And that power vacuum was filled by 3 tribes of Germans, or Germanic tribes: the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. They came in originally as raiders, but later they decided, it's warmer down here, let's stay. And they started taking over the place. They were pagans, and they were pagans, and the monasteries and churches were very wealthy, often very wealthy targets. So many of the great scholars of the period, and I'm sure some not so great scholars, and a lot of just plain people, said, we can't resist these guys, we're getting out. Some went to Wales, some went to Scotland, many went to Ireland, taking their books with them. And suddenly there's this explosion of scholarship in Ireland. Not just Christian scholarship. They were introduced in a way they'd never been before to classical literature and classical culture. So suddenly Ireland is an intellectual center. It's still poor, it's still tribal, but the monasteries become great centers of learning. And we know that one of those under whom Columbus studied was Welsh. So no wonder he was so good. The monastery at Clonard had over 300 students when Columbus studied there. This was a big enterprise. These guys, and what were they being educated to do? They were being educated as missionaries, primarily. And Irish missionaries went out into Europe as far as Hungary and much the Czech Republic. Ma'am.
Was the Book of Kells one of those books that was taken, back to Ireland?
I think it's a little early. No, that's early. That was produced in Ireland. Kells was another one of these monasteries. That was the name of the place. Okay. So, he's very well educated. He was described as a large and athletic man with a commanding manner and a strong voice. And he spent the next 15 years traveling around Ireland, preaching and establishing monasteries. That's what he was educated for. And he was a prince. Well, not a prince exactly, but he was of royal lineage. And then something happened. There are two conflicting stories, although maybe they could both be true. Who knows? About Columba and what changed his life forever. There's an Irish game called hurling. Anybody familiar with it? Okay. Hurling is a combination. It looks like I've only seen it once. Saw it on TV. It's the Irish national game. 15 men on the side. It's a combination of lacrosse, field hockey, and murder by clubbing to death. It is the roughest thing I have ever seen. Just watching. I played rugby. I played a little football. Looking at it on TV made me realize I'm glad I was born in America. I mean, hurling is just brutally, brutally tough. Sir?
Have you ever seen that movie, The Northman?
No. Did they play it?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, wow. It's brutal. I mean,
because when you were describing it, I'm thinking of that movie, and I think that's what they were playing. It sounds like it.
Yeah. It's sometimes referred to as the game of war in Ireland. I mean,
Yeah.
It's really, really rough. And there's no such thing as half sticking. You just learn to duck.
Bang.
During the game of hurling, a prince of the O'Neill clan, so one of Columba's relatives, killed another player who was a relative of King Diarmid. And he didn't stick around for a trial, okay? He went to Columba's monastery to seek sanctuary. Now, monasteries, like churches, were held to be places where you could not be apprehended by force. So if you could take refuge in one, you were seeking sanctuary. We use the term sanctuary all the time without reflecting on the fact that the root of it is sanctus, holy. Okay? Well, King Diarmid's men didn't play by those rules. They broke the sanctuary. They went into the monastery by force. They dragged this guy physically away and killed him on the spot. War broke out between the two clans, and there was a battle. We don't know precisely how bad it was, but the most common figure you hear, it's probably traditional, is that 3,000 men were killed. Okay. Columba had raised this insurrection essentially against the king on behalf of the O'Neill clan, and he was held for instigating the war and also held responsible for the killings. And it was said that he had actually carried arms in that battle, which was a total violation of monastic rule. Which leads me to another quote from a contemporary writer, which I think is just lovely. Of all qualities, gentleness was precisely the one in which Columba failed the most. Now, there is another story. I said there were two stories about it, and the other story is really good too. The other story holds that while studying under in Finian's library. Remember Finian? Yes. Okay. While studying in Finian's library, Columba had made a copy of a book of Psalms that was owned by Finian and was kept in Finian's monastic library. And when Finian found out about this, he said, "That belongs to me. You had no permission to copy it, so give me the copy." And Columba refused to do that. So it went to judgment, and a group of nobles was called in to judge it, or King Diarmid, I think, was called in to judge it as well. He was chief of them. And Diarmid ruled that it was, that the book belonged to Finian. He is quoted as having said, let me get it straight. Yes, who's the cow is the calf. All right? So, Columba refused to give up the book and raised this rebellion. Now, either or both of those stories may be true. What is true is that there was a war between the O'Neills and the Diarmid's people, and that the O'Neills won. And this is the beginning of the O'Neill dynasty, which lasted for a couple of centuries as high kings in Ireland. In any event, there was a battle. Columba may or may not have fought in it. A lot of guys got killed, and Columba was overcome by guilt about all this death in this battle. And he decided to repent by leaving Ireland and going into a sort of self-imposed exile and serving as a missionary from exile. One source says that he vowed to convert as many souls to Christ as had died in the war. So and I know this sounds like mythology, but it isn't. This is pretty well attested. He and 12 other monks, all of whom were members of the O'Neill clan, so they were his relatives, made a voyage. And they made it in coracles. A coracle is a little boat with a wooden skeleton covered in skins. The Eskimos make something very similar, except coracles were often round. And they made they left from somewhere around here, and they went way up here to Iona. This, for those of you who know Scotland, this is the Isle of Mull. Skye's up this way. Iona is this little island just off the coast of Mull. Now, Gwen and I have been there. It's part of the Inner Hebrides. It's flat. As I recall it, it's treeless or almost. It's cold, even in the summer, over there in the summer. And it's a rough place to be. It really is. It's harsh, very harsh. And he and his 12 companions settled there as a monastic community. And that would be where he would work out of, either living there or being other places for the rest of his life. Why had he chosen this particular spot? Why, I don't know, other than that, just being there was penance. Well, Iona is roughly, there it is. It runs, if you run a line across here, south of here were mostly, sorry, I forget which way it goes, but anyhow, it was split between two different peoples, the Scots and the Picts. And Iona, and Columba and his monks decided they were going to missionize both of those people, both the Scots and the Picts. Now, you think Ireland was rough. Scotland was much rougher. And again, Celts, but still. So he could reach out to both of those cultures there. And Columba traveled all over Scotland and Northumbria, the northern part of England. It'll be down here. Founding churches, founding monasteries, operating as a missionary and as a teacher. Iona, in its own right, became a place to study. It became a place that produced many famous missionaries, and the Iona monastery became quite large and very famous. It's the place where most of the kings of Scotland were buried, including Macbeth. Yeah, he was a real guy. And Malcolm, he was Malcolm the First. He was a real guy too. We cannot spot their, we cannot, not all the graves are still marked. I'll get to that later. Columba remained connected to Ireland. He traveled to Ireland multiple times. So it's pretty clear he hadn't been exiled by anyone else. This was something he did himself. Usually to participate in church councils, but sometimes he'd be called in to mediate disputes or to settle, anyhow. But Iona was his home. It's where he kept coming back to. People visited him there. If you wanted to meet Columba, if you wanted to seek a healing, or if you wanted to get counsel in some way, that was where you went to see the holy man. And he had a great reputation for personal holiness. Unlike Patrick, he was described as polished and eloquent. He was a gentleman. He was a gentleman of his time. And he continued to study his whole life. The library at Iona grew during his time there. He was known as a very self-disciplined individual who lived extremely simply, almost austerely, despite his background. Columba died at the age of 75, and he was buried on Iona. When the Vikings arrived, it wasn't just the east coast of England that got ravaged. It was everything. And after repeated raids and burnings of the monastery and one thing and another, finally, in the 9th century, it was given up. They left. The monks said, we can't do this anymore. It's not possible. And when they left, they took Columba's bones and they divided them. Some went to Scotland, some went to Ireland. They have since been split up in other ways, I'm sure, many. But the one that I know of is that some of his bones are in the reliquary chapel in the Basilica of the Sacred Heart on the campus of Notre Dame University. Columba was revered as the missionary to the Scots, and he was seen as someone in his sainthood after his death. He was seen as someone who could be appealed to for any number of problems or illnesses or whatever, including, and he would have hated this, he was revered as a warrior saint. I mean, after all, they fought in a battle, didn't they? And they won. Maybe the most famous victory of the Scots over the English at all time was 1314, the Battle of Bannockburn, where Robert the Bruce defeated Edward II, King Edward II of England, and essentially established Scotland's autonomy again. Robert the Bruce had relics of St. Columba carried into that valley. So Columba made an enormous impression in many, many ways. And I personally, I see taking these three saints together, it shows once again, and I know I've said this often, but I can't repeat it enough, how many different ways there are to serve God. How many different ways there are. Patrick could never have been Columba. Okay? Patrick was not polished. Patrick was not eloquent. I'm not sure that Columba could ever have been Patrick either. Because Patrick's spirituality was forged all alone as a slave in a pagan land. And Columba's spirituality was forged with the best education the time and place had to offer. Both of them, both of them were real historical figures. But Patrick has been so overlaid with legends and so forth, that and the records from his period are so poor that it's hard to really know much. You know, we have a lot of good stories, and maybe they teach good things, but if you're kind of a typical modern mind, you want something a little more solid than that. Well, we don't have it for Patrick. We just don't. The records weren't there. But we do have it for Columba. Columba was a major cultural figure in his own time. And we know we know a great deal about him from contemporaries as well as from those who knew him and wrote after his death. So there's not just one path. There's not just one path to Christ. And again, I may have said this before, but it's worth saying. One of my personal favorite New Testament verses is, the Good Shepherd knows his sheep, and he calls them by name. He calls them by name. He doesn't just say, hey, sheep, okay? It's, your name is your identity. And the idea is that he will call each person as that person can hear. And this is important to me because I recognize that I didn't share what a lot of clergy have, which is a very strong spiritual, almost mystical experience. My conversion was more intellectual. And that's okay. I share that with C.S. Lewis. That's good enough for me. But the point is, God will call whom he wants. He wants everybody, but he'll call each of us in a way that we can listen to, in a way that we can hear, and in a way that we can respond to. That may lead us down very different paths. I don't see Patrick fighting in a battle. I don't see Patrick getting into a copyright dispute with another monk. But by the way, that battle is sometimes referred to as the Battle of the Book. But I've probably said enough. I'm supposed to be talking about saints, not about me. So, ma'am.
Well, go ahead and make your point. I just had a couple of questions.
It's right up here.
Okay.
My point.
The incident in which the British armies wiped out those last vestiges of
The Roman army.
What year was that?
64.
64?
About 64. I think.
AD? Or BC?
No, AD. It was during the reign of Nero. It was in the 60s.
Okay.
It might have been, it was earlier than 65, I know that.
Okay.
But, you know, my memory for that period is somewhere.
And Nero was then.
Yeah.
And the other question,
By the way, anybody who's interested in that, there is an absolutely stunning novel, which nobody reads anymore, by a man named George Shipway, who was a retired British Army officer.
How do you spell the last name?
Shipway. And it is one of the best historical novels I've ever read. It's called Imperial Governor. And it's about Suetonius Paulus. And it is so good in so many ways.
Imperial
Governor.
Governor.
I'm sorry, I interrupted
No,
you.
that's,
but
the other question.
I'm a great enthusiast for that book.
The other question that just came to my mind, you had mentioned that the Celts basically were spread all over Europe and worshipped.
Pretty
often-
much, they didn't get down in Spain too much.
But in northern Europe, but that they worshipped in groves and there's so many places in the Old Testament when the good Jewish kings come in, they wipe out the groves. And,
Oh, yes.
And I wondered if there's a connection there with similarity with the religions, or
Only to the extent that they both saw trees, in particular, trees and bodies of water, as being places that were touched by spirits or inhabited by spirits. Incidentally, this was not limited to them. Have you read The Golden Bough?
I know of that.
Fraser? Well, he talks about the grove of, what is it, whoever was there. And after Delphi, the most sacred place in Greece was the Oracle of Dodona, which was an oak forest. And people would go into the forest and talk to the priest, and the priest would listen to the leaves and tell them what it said. I can't do that.
You don't have enough.
That's true. I don't. Maybe we could substitute a maple. I got one of those. For some reason, and there's just so much we don't know about the Druids. Oh, and by the way, I can't talk for real without trashing somebody. The people who call themselves Druids today have no idea what they're talking about. Really, they don't.
That's not uncommon.
And it's been a long time since they sacrificed anybody. But some of them believe that the Druids built Stonehenge. Please.
No.
The time between the building of Stonehenge and the Druids is longer than the time between the Druids and us. Now, they may have used those stone circles, but whatever. Oh, I forgot something. Sorry. One of the other things about Iona, it is many people believe that it was Columba at Iona who introduced the Celtic cross. This is a Celtic cross. It's just a Latin cross with a circle, okay? And that becomes a very important symbol in Celtic Christianity. It's the circle right at the junction of the cross. Y'all know what the circle is.
And why do you have that cross?
Because my wife made one for me just like it,
Smart boy.
and I lost it body surfing.
Oh, yeah. Dumb boy.
So she had somebody else make this one as a perfect copy.
Smart mom.
Do you know why they chose the circle?
Pardon me?
Do you know why Columba chose the circle?
There are a couple of different ideas about it. It depends. I think it's a minority opinion, but it's still worthy of discussion that it represents the sun. Because in the Druids were not sun worshippers. They oriented themselves around the moon. And so the sun becomes, whatever. But most people would say that it represents eternity. Because no beginning, no end. By the way, one of the things that the Celtic Church did, it would build these very large stone crosses out in the countryside, usually at a crossroads somewhere. And they were not just a big cross, usually a Celtic cross. And by the way, that would also help if you're building a stone cross to have that extra to help hold the arms up, okay?
Sure.
But these crosses were often highly carved with scenes from usually scenes from the life of Christ, sometimes other Old Testament, or other New Testament or Old Testament scenes. Many of them still survive in their original spots, but mostly they're shattered The Presbyterians saw that. But, they're very, very old. But there were a lot of them there. And that began on Iona. Columba began that. Ma'am.
I'm a little confused on the dates. I think you said that Gaius Plutonius Paulinus had destroyed the Druids in 60 or 61 AD,
Yeah.
but didn't St. Patrick have a lot of opposition from the Druids, and he was much
destroyed the
later
Druids in Britain.
in Britain? Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Remember,
I didn't get that
Britain
rule.
stopped at the water
Okay,
and stopped in Hadrian's Wall.
okay.
Well, Hadrian comes later to build the wall, but Northumbria
One quick one.
was it.
You
Sir,
mentioned that the Presbyterians came in and destroyed it. I have no idea what you're talking about. The Presbyterians, it's
That's
a short answer,
Scotland had been a Catholic country.
right?
At the Reformation, it was the Presbyterians who became preeminent in Scotland. And today, the Church of Scotland is Presbyterian, okay?
All right.
And anything that referenced Catholicism or older forms of Christianity, they didn't like it. Now, a lot of them were already in bad shape, but they did break down some. Man,
Were the Scottish Presbyterians basically Scottish Puritans, but by a different name?
pretty much.
Oh, okay.
Very different theology, but very similar attitudes. My paternal grandfather was what is known. Now he was not Scottish, but he was not Scottish in blood, but he was what is known as a Scottish Presbyterian, which is sometimes been referred to as a good man in the worst way. Meaning someone who's very upright and very concerned about not misbehaving, but making damn sure nobody else has a good time either. He was pretty tough. I love that phrase. I'm
Good man.
a terrible person. But y'all all knew that. Anybody else got anything to say? I wish you would, because I learned from y'all too. Well, I can't tell you what we're doing next week because I haven't decided. But I really was looking forward to this. I said I was going to do it, and I did. I hope I've made the point that I don't think I've made it explicitly enough. The fact that the church in its early days, when it was in a minority and attempting to convert the peoples, a lot of customs that had previously been used by the various pagan groups whom the church encountered, a lot of those customs were adopted and Christianized. And I've talked about this before. There is nothing shameful or wrong about that. It was the world. It was the culture. And again, that great medieval phrase, grace does not destroy nature, it perfects it. Well, these things have been sources of some degree of light and truth to a lot of people for a long time. And if they could be demonstrated as being congruent with the work of Jesus Christ, I don't see anything wrong with that. After all, we have to make Christians out of non-Christians. That includes our children. No, it does. They aren't born Christian. And we make Christian customs out of non-Christian customs. There's nothing wrong with that. The roots of the church and the roots of Christian religion are both Hebraic and monotheistic, and to some degree affected very heavily by other traditions from which we have extracted what we see as I say, congruent with the truth that we know in Jesus Christ. So I make no apologies for it. People think I should be shocked. Did you know that the Romans had a thing called Saturday? Yeah, I know. Okay? It doesn't matter. What matters is what we believe. And the fact that There were people who practiced those customs believing something very different. Doesn't change what we are or what we believe.
Jesus says that wonderful verses out there. I have sheep in other folds that ye know not of. You know.
Like the man who takes treasure, brings forth from his storehouse treasures both old and new. And when you're saying that in the first century, old means pagan. Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Listen, I appreciate you guys. This keeps me going. Even though I must admit I'm having a lot of trouble with my vision. And I'm now, it's slow work because when I type, I have to use 16-point type on the computer so I can read it. But hopefully my eyes will stabilize and I'll get the fresh glasses and will once again be able to miss things with my rifle at 30 yards.
Have you ever read a book, Scottish Chiefs?
No, who's it about?
I think her name is Eleanor Porter. But anyway, it's an old book.
I like old books.
And it has to do with Sir William Wallace.
Ah,
And one of the final parts of it is the battle you were talking about.
Bannockburn.
Right. And when Robert Bruce comes and defeats the English after they have taken Sir William Wallace
And they were
off to London.
and they were really
executed.
outnumbered there. The Scots were.
Yeah. And
That was a shocking victory.
yes, it talks about how Wallace's wife was murdered by the English, and he goes on and all he did, and then got Bannockburn and won.
Unfortunately,
But they had taken him off to be killed.
the Scots were Celts too.
Okay.
And sometimes their attitude towards their history is pretty much like the old Irish attitude. It's a good story. Let's tell it. Let's say it happened.
George MacDonald says of the Scotch that they combine a fierce morality with a fierce romanticism.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and that's what it is. It is a romanticism. Oh, I love that. Didn't know that.